Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. This story was submitted to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com by a viewer just like you. For most of my adult life, I had a best friend. More like a brother, actually, and he and I spent many hours discussing the strange and eerie things that had befallen us in our lives. My friend, Chris, was 7 years older than I was, born in the early 50s into a staunch Catholic family. He therefore swore me to secrecy in the matter of his supernatural experiences for the sake of family and reputation in the community. However, he is now 7 years dead, and all but a younger sister in his family are also deceased. So I think I can safely share at least one of the tales and risk the consequences. This then is the story of the Babysitter. As a boy, Chris lived in a terrace house in the north of England with his mother, father, 2 older brothers, and a younger sister. When he grew up, he bought the house from his parents, and then once he was married, he and his wife lived there. I asked him once why he decided to buy the house he grew up in. Why not develop new memories with your own family in a different house? He raised one eyebrow and cryptically told me, "I never let anything beat me, not even this house." Years passed before he told me what that meant. Chris was not your average English working-class lad. By the time he was 10 years old, his school teachers were advising he be moved to a school for gifted children. His parents refused, and he stayed at the local Catholic school. The nuns who ran the school threatened him with expulsion several times for heretical views, and only the intervention of an English teacher prevented it. He published his first set of horror stories at 13 years old, his first poetry a year later. He dabbled in theater, which is where I met him. We had a moderately successful writing partnership over the years. We wrote songs and produced a number of stage plays. It was only when I suggested moving into ghost stories that for the first and only time, he turned me down flat. "You want to write that stuff? You write it alone," he told me. On several occasions, I conducted paranormal investigations with another friend of mine, and I had a wealth of experiences and tales to share, but Chris would have none of it. His excuse was always the same. It would be unacceptable in the eyes of his family. One evening at his house, we were talking about ghosts, films, our latest projects, and women. He suddenly stopped talking and stared at the door to the front room. His face drained of all color and his eyes widened. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Look at the door handle," he whispered. I turned from my position sitting on the floor and looked over my shoulder. It took a moment, but then I saw what he meant. More slowly than the hour hand of a clock, the door handle was rotating. Someone, or something, was opening the door. "Hi, June," I called out, assuming it was Chris's wife, back from her darts match at the local pub. "June won't be back till 11, he said. "Besides, did you hear the front door open?" I admitted that I had not. "Stay there," he ordered, "and whatever you do, don't open that door." He stood up and crossed to the dining table and picked up a silver salt shaker, and holding it like an aspergillum, crossed to the door. Chris closed his eyes briefly, mumbled what I assumed was a prayer, and then threw open the door, at the same time casting salt into the opening in 2 broad sweeps, one horizontal, one vertical. I leapt up and ran to his side. The passageway was empty. "What the hell?" I demanded. Chris was physically shaken, and I caught him as his knees began to buckle. Not an easy task. He was 8 inches taller than me and twice the weight. I helped him back to his chair. "All right, Chris," I exclaimed. "What's with the exorcist bit? I thought you said all that kind of thing was a sham." He shook his head and downed a whole mug of coffee in one gulp. He then began trying to get a cigarette out of its packet and light it with fingers so obviously numb and shaking that I had to do it for him. "When I said that about ghosts," he explained, "it was not because I don't believe in them. It was because I do." He sat back and took a long draw on his cigarette. "When I was a kid, this house terrified me. One thing after another every day, until I put a stop to it." I watched his face. I knew Chris in storytelling mode, and this was not it. He was absolutely sincere, and he was frightened. I have never seen Chris frightened on any other occasion. "You remember my gran?" he asked. We all knew Chris's mad Irish granny. She was a local character, 4 feet tall, spry as a leprechaun, and had not been sober in 40 years. Mad Gran had once procured a stag's head from a local pub for the sole purpose of teaching Chris's elder brother a lesson. The brother had delighted in telling Penny, his younger sister, that there was no such thing as Santa, breaking the 4-year-old's heart. Gran painted the stag's nose red, and the brother woke up to find it in bed with him, along with a copious amount of tomato sauce in true Godfather fashion, with a note reading, "I bloody well do exist, and here's Rudolph to prove it." "Yes, I remember your Gran," I replied. "Back in the old country, she was the go-to woman for this kind of thing," he told me. "Magic, evil spirits, you name it. She knew about it and what was to be done about it." I nodded. "My mom did too, but when she married, Dad made her give it all up. Gran was not happy about that, but, well, that's another story." The cigarette had burned away by this time. He had calmed down enough now that he was able to light another one without any help. "She told me a lot about it, when Dad was not around, of course. Taught me to read the cards, tea leaves, all that stuff, and how to deal with spirits." He was still clutching the shaker, and grains of salt adhered to his hand. "Salt," he said. "You know why people think holy water works on evil?" "Because it is blessed?" I said. "No," he shook his head. "In the old days, holy water was seawater, full of salt. Salt purifies. Salt for spirits, iron for imps and fairy folk, pure water for demons," he recited. I'll admit to having been the butt of a number of practical jokes by Chris at one time or another. "So there was a ghost at the living room door?" I asked a little incredulously. "When I bought this house," he told me, 2 days before the wedding, I had Gran come around here and we cleansed the place top to bottom. Drove out anything and everything skulking here, especially her. Cleansed the hell out of it, literally." "Her?" "I'm coming to that." He was almost chewing the cigarette now. "I wanted to get a priest in here too, but Gran would have none of it. She always said priests are good for hatching, matching, and dispatching, and nothing else." "When I was a boy," he sighed, as if resigned to the fact that he had come this far and was not going to stop now, "my dad bought this house cheap, really cheap. The people here before us could not wait to get out. These houses were built originally for the river workers, dockers, and the like. This was the 60s, and the docks were still working then. My older brothers, Walt and Desi, were both quite a bit older than me, and so I was bottom of the heap. Penny was a girl, so she was the apple of all their eyes. Walt was the oldest, Desi was the athlete, and I was too clever for my own good. Dad was really into the church. Mom went along with it, and so on Saturday night when they were at a social or a meeting or something and Walt and Desi had dates, I was stuck with looking after Penny on my own. I was 10. I had never been allowed to be home alone before and never allowed to be responsible for Penny. Like I said, this house terrified me. Lying in bed at night, I used to hear things being dragged across the floor in the attic. I used to feel hands on my back when I was on the stairs, and I knew if I let go of the banister, those hands would push me down. I heard music at night, brass band music that no one else seemed to hear, and I would feel someone sitting on the end of the bed in the dark, staring at me. "Jesus," I replied. "Didn't you tell anyone?" He shrugged. "Yes, but they never believed me. Except for Gran. She gave me a bag of herbs to hang on the door handle, on the inside. No one ever sat on my bed after that. But someone did push me down the stairs. I broke my leg. I started going down sideways after that." "So anyway, you were babysitting?" I prompted. Yes, Mom told me that if there was any trouble, to go next door and get Mrs. Walker, but only if it was an emergency. It all started when it got dark. He paused to light up another cigarette. We had a coal fire in those days. Everyone did. But before my mom and dad went out, Dad damped down the coal ash, and I was under no circumstances to try and relight it. Penny was already in bed and asleep, and I was allowed to listen to the wireless until 7, then I had to go to bed too. He stopped and looked into the fireplace where the new electric fire now stood in front of a sheet of formica that blocked up the chimney. It was cold. I remember that. I was listening to a repeat of the Goon Show or Round the Horn or something, but it kept getting colder. It wasn't winter, it was autumn, but it was freezing. I began to see my breath in the air. As if to punctuate this, he blew out a long jet of smoke. The radio was over there where the dining chair is now. The front room and dining room were separate then. It just got colder and colder, and then without warning, the radio just went off. That scared me. I could only think, they're going to think I broke it. I'll get my hide tanned for this, for sure. I got blamed for most things. Walt and Desi always blamed me, and Penny could do no wrong. So I turned the radio off and decided to pretend I'd never touched it. I tucked my hands into my sleeves and went upstairs to bed. You know the spare room where you sleep on occasion? Well, that was my room. We had an outside toilet, so what is now the bathroom was Penny's room then, and the main bedroom was my brother's room. Mom and the old fella slept here in the front room, and we used the dining room as a family room. So I went up to bed. Now, the odd thing is that in the passage and on the stairs, the temperature was normal. Not cold at all. Now that is when I remembered that I needed to go to the toilet. I had a potty in my room. Well, no, actually I had a bucket. Only Penny and the old fella had a proper potty, but I hated using it. It stunk. So I turned around and went back downstairs, through the kitchen and outside to the privy. Now, in there was always cold. There was a porcelain pot and cistern, white tiles on the wall, stone floor, and a bakelite seat. Makes me shiver to think of it. Anyhow, I went as quickly as I could and made my way back inside. That is when I noticed that the front room light was on. I had not been in Mom's room since they went out. Their main door, that door we just saw move, and the sliding door between their room and the dining room were both shut. But I could see light shining from under the sliding door. Red light, as if the fire was a light, and white light from the bulb. When I listened, I could hear the fire crackling, which it did not normally do. We burned coal, not wood. I decided to go get Mrs. Walker. I was sure that whoever was in the front room was not anybody I knew, and if the house was on fire, I was sensible enough not to open the door on it. So I went on into the passage, and that is when I saw it. What? What? I demanded. The door had bars all over it. What? I was not sure I had heard right. Chris took a deep breath. All across the door, left to right, some straight, some on an angle, were glowing bars of light, about 7 of them, like in the old Doctor Strange comics. They were just light, but somehow I knew if I had touched them, it would not be good. It would hurt or burn. I just knew. So what did you do? I asked. He swallowed, and I am sure I saw a tear in his eye as he tried to make himself carry on. I turned around and went back up the passage to Mom and the old man's door, he said. Somehow I forced myself to lift my hand and knock on the door. If it were the old man back early, he would answer. He didn't, though. By that point, I think I was so frightened I was on a high of sorts, because the rest is all like a dream. I remember reaching out for the doorknob. I put these handles on later, and it was hot. The whole door was hot, like there was an inferno inside, but somehow I knew I had to open the door. When I did, it swung open, and inside was not my parents' room. It was older and an old-fashioned parlor. There was a huge fire burning in the grate and gas lamps lighting up the sideboard and one big armchair by the fire. Someone was sitting in the armchair, the sort with a wing back, so I could not see them. But I could see they were poking the fire, stirring it up to a bigger and higher, hotter blaze. The sort of blaze the old fellow would never have allowed. He would have said it would set the chimney on fire. I never understood that phrase. I took a step into the room. The heat was oppressive. I instantly got a headache, and sweat broke out on my face and back, and my eyes began to tear up from the smoke. But I stepped forward. I could not stop myself. I was praying to God to help me. I was promising to go to church every Sunday, to stop swearing, anything to just get out of there. But still, I walked on, one stuttering, juddering footfall at a time, until I was in front of the fire, watching that red-hot, literally glowing red-hot poker jabbing in and out of the fire, turning the ashes, urging the flame to greater and greater intensity. The red poker stopped moving. "You should be in bed," said a voice. It was old and dusty, falling like crunching ash in my ears. A voice that might once have been female, but which was rendered soot-ridden and raspy with the passage of time. "You can go if you want to," cackled the voice. "You can leave the girl with me." That broke the trance. The idea of leaving Penny with this hideous thing repulsed and repelled me more than any fear for my own safety. I turned and glared at it. I don't know what I expected, but it was not this. The thing in the armchair poking the fire viciously was dressed in a floor-length black woolen turn-of-the-century style Salvation Army uniform that covered all but the tips of her pointed black boots and buttoned so tightly at the wrists and neck that her hands and throat were purple with strain. The ensemble came complete with one of those black straw-woven bonnets, trimmed in red with a funereal bow on the side that hid her face from me in its depths. She turned her head to look at me, and there in the pit of the arch of her bonnet was framed a white, gaunt face. Pure white and hatchet-shaped, colorless but for the red slit of a mouth and the two gaping black chasms where her eyes should have been. Then it smiled, the thin, grotesque gash that served as lips for the creature pulled back over black and brown, putrefied teeth. She spoke again, more a command this time than a proposition. "You leave her with me." I think I screamed. I know I ran out into the hall. The bars were gone from the door, and I was grasping to grab the handle when it opened from the outside. I crashed straight into my mom, screaming and gibbering. I remember my dad yelling at me, and then the smell, that unique smell of burning carpet as the old man screamed something about me being a dangerous little fool, and then screaming in pain as he tried to pick up the still glowing hot poker off the passage floor and dropping it again as it burned his hand. The scorch mark is still on the hall carpet. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. I admitted that I did, but had never paid much attention. The old man beat me black and blue that night, he finished, all the time yelling that I was supposed to be the clever one. So how come I did not know not to play with fire? Of course, when they checked, the grate was cold, the ashes undisturbed. So how did the poker get red hot? He didn't care to pursue that line of questioning, but I swore I would get even with this woman, this thing, this whatever it was. They shouldn't think that they will ever get me out of this damned house, or that they can ever come back in it again themselves. No one can threaten my family, and won't ever again. I never forget. I always get even. This has been another strange but true story submitted to us by a viewer just like you. Do you have any creepy, weird, or paranormal stories to share? Has something happened to you that you just can't quite explain? We'd love to hear about it. Send your account to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Tell us what you thought about this story in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to those who have. It is really appreciated. I'm Steve White. Thanks for watching. Until next time.